الطيبين الطاهرين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم ذكرنا ما نسينا وعلمنا ما جهلنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من حال أهل النار لله تعالى. I praise Allah and glorify Him and I thank Him for all the blessings that He gives without being obligated, and I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and to protect His Muslim nation. I testify that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, the one without a partner, the one without an equal, the one without a similar, the one who is unlike anything in the universe, and nothing in the universe is like Him. He has no father, no mother, no sister, no brother, no son, and no daughter. He exists without time and place because He is the creator of time and place. He does not reside above the throne, and He is not attributed with fatigue like the Jews say. Our Lord is glorified beyond any imperfection that the non-Muslims attribute to Him. Whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah Ta'ala does not resemble that. And whoever attributes an attribute of the creations to Allah is outside of Islam. And I testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, the son of Abdul Manaf, from the tribe of Quraysh, is the best creation of Allah and His final prophet and messenger sent to all humans and jinn, and He is truthful about everything that He conveyed in the revelation. Thereafter, remind ourselves to have a sincere intention for the sake of Allah in attending this session of Islamic knowledge, because having a sincere intention is a requirement to get the reward. So the Muslim, whenever he does a good deed, he has to have a sincere intention for the sake of Allah to get reward for that good deed. The reward is defined as the compensation that the Muslim receives in hereafter for the good deeds that he did in this life among what makes him happy. An example of the reward that is guaranteed to the righteous Muslim in the grave is that his grave is expanded approximately 105 feet by 105 feet, and his grave is illuminated with a light similar to the light of the full moon, and the fragrance of paradise will be present in the grave. The sincere intention means for the Muslim to do the good deed, seeking the acceptance of Allah only, and not the praise of the people. So alhamdulillah, we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided by Islam, and we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided to have access to the authentic chains of narration, which is the only way for the individual to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is through knowing what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught and what he conveyed of the revelation. So the one who wants to have success and the one who wants to walk the straight path and the one who wants to gain the virtue, then he has to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam perfectly. And you cannot follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam perfectly unless you have the knowledge. So continuing on with our subject matter, which is the explanation of Abī Shujā, which is a beginner's book in the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence, of Islamic jurisprudence. And it is a book that is widely famous and well known among those that study the Islamic knowledge formally, and among the students of knowledge, this is one of the first books that they're taught. So we have been blessed to have a reliable translation, and so now this knowledge can be absorbed by those who do not speak Arabic. So we're on page 82, finishing off the chapter of the Khuf. We mentioned that if one wiped while residing and then traveled, or wiped while traveling and then resided, one continues wiping as a resident For example, if a person from Philadelphia wipes on his hoof and then travels, or wipes while traveling and enters Philadelphia before 24 hours end, he wipes only for 24 hours. So alhamdulillah, this rule is simple and clear. The consideration is given for the state of the person when he wiped. So he wiped while he was a non-traveler, and then he begins to travel, so he only has 24 hours. And the other scenario is this person is traveling, and within the travel he wipes, but then before the 24 hours end, he enters, the new town, and his travel ends because he intends to stay there, for example, for a year. So once he enters the border of the new town, his travel is over. So what is the situation of his wiping on the hoof? The situation is that if he enters before the 24 hours end, and he wipes only for 24 hours. So this is, alhamdulillah, something very simple, very easy to know, something very easy to understand. And there are many benefits for the wiping on the hoof, which is that it allows the Muslim, while he's on the go, when he has the conditions satisfied of the hoof, instead of washing his foot to make wudu, he can wipe on the hoof and be on a complete wudu. So this is very, very beneficial for the Muslim. So when the Muslim is traveling, then in that case, the time period is extended to 3 days and nights. So that would be 3 days with their nights that are connected to them, so 72 hours. And we mentioned that the beginning of the wiping is based on when he goes into a state of ritual impurity. And so we said for the ritual impurity that is through his decision or through his voluntary choice, the time period begins as soon as that thing takes place. And if it was something that was not of his choice, like sleeping, like sleeping, then in that case, the time for the wiping that he has, it is counted from when his sleep ends. So that is very beneficial. Now, we're going to talk about what wiping is when we say wiping on the hoof. The author said, when wiping the hoof is enough to wipe them, even if it is with one finger, just a little. So basically, wetting the finger and touching the hoof. It also suffices if one puts his wet hand on the hoof without moving it. So he doesn't even have to move his wet hand, because the wetness reaches the hoof by this. It is sufficient to wipe on the upper part of the hoof without wiping the bottom, but it is not sufficient to only wipe the bottom. Therefore, it is not enough to wipe the heel only, or the sole only, or the sides only. One needs to wipe a part of the top. The sunnah is to wipe the hoof, drawing lines with the fingers spread apart from the toes towards the leg. So imagine this was the foot. Let me see here. So imagine this was the foot. These are the toes. So you have your wet hand, and you, from the toe area, from that front area, up towards the shin. So let's say the shin was here, up towards the shin. That's how the sunnah wiping takes place. The best way is to wipe the hoof, putting one's left hand under the heel of the foot on the sole, and the right hand on the toes, and to move your right hand towards your leg and your left hand towards your toes. It is makruh to try to wipe the whole hoof or to wipe more than once, although it is valid because this causes the hoof to be spoiled with no necessity, meaning from being excessively wet or from constantly being wet. So let's say that we have there's a hoof or the bottom of the hoof and then the top part of it. And so with the top part, you go back towards the leg, and with the bottom part, you go towards the torso. So I'm moving them both at the same time. The page number is page 82. So now we're on the last paragraph of page 82. The author said, 3 matters invalidate the wiping of the hoof: taking them off, and if the period of wiping the hoof ends, and what makes ghusl an obligation. This means if one takes off his hoof, or if one takes one of them off, or if they are taken off without him doing that, like if they fell off while running, or if one of them no longer satisfies the 3 conditions, then wiping on the hoof is invalidated. Also, 24 hours pass for the one who is not traveling, and 72 hours pass for the one who is traveling, then wiping on the hoof is invalidated. Likewise, if one doubts whether the time ended or not. Once one doubts, the time ends. For example, if someone puts the hoof on, and after 5 or 6 hours he invalidates his wudu and starts counting, then he doubts whether the time of wiping the hoof ended or not. This doubt invalidates the wiping. The third matter is if what renders the ghusl an obligation happens. For example, if one was wearing the hoof and before the time ended, mani exited or the woman gave birth, in these cases, the wiping of the footgear is immediately invalidated. An-Nasa'i and others narrated from Safwan ibn Asad that he said that whenever they traveled with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet ﷺ ordered them to wipe on their footgear for 3 days without taking them off if they defecate, urinate, or sleep, except for emitting mani. So alhamdulillah, by that we finish talking about the khuf. Now we go to a new chapter, which is tayammum, dry purification. There are 5 conditions for performing tayammum, dry purification: the existence of an excuse because of traveling or sickness, the setting in of the prayer time, seeking the water, the inability to use it and needing it after seeking it, and pure dusty soil. Because if it were mixed with gypsum or sand, then it is not sufficient. Tayammum has 4 obligations: the intention, wiping the face, wiping the hands with the elbows, and keeping the order. It has 3 recommendations: the tasmiyah, which is saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, doing the right side before the left, and performing the acts in succession. 3 things invalidate the tayammum: whatever invalidates the wudu, seeing water while not praying, and apostasy. The one who has a cast wipes on it, makes tayammum, and prays. He does not have to make up this prayer if he put the cast on while in a state of purification. One makes tayammum for every obligatory prayer and prays with one tayammum as many optional prayers as one wishes. So that was the matan. The explanation, it says, this section talks about the conditions, integrals, sunan, and invalidators of tayammum. Tayammum is permissible because of the verse, which means if you do not find water, then use the pure soil to make tayammum. Tayammum did not exist in the rules of previous prophets. It is specific to this nation. It was revealed in the 6th year of Hijrah. Linguistically, tayammum means to seek. Religiously, tayammum means to make the dust reach the face and hands in replacement of making wudu, even if it is not an obligation, or in replacement of making ghusl, even if it is not an obligation, or in replacement of washing the organ that is obligatory to wash. From this definition, it is understood that one has to transfer the soil. So if one stands in the wind and the wind carries the soil, and because of the wind it covers his face and hands, this is not valid. He must transfer the dusty soil himself or someone else when he gives permission to. For tayammum to be permissible, there are reasons and conditions. And so the person should adhere to those reasons and conditions so that they can make sure that the tayammum is valid. According to Imam Shafi'i, radiyallahu anhu, the tayammum needs to be made with dusty soil. The author said he must transfer the dusty soil himself or someone else whom he gives permission to. For tayammum to be permissible, there are reasons and conditions. Yani he has to have the intention. The author said, Judge Abī Shujā said there are 5 conditions for performing tayammum. Truly, there are more reasons and conditions for the permissibility of tayammum, but to keep it short, he said the conditions are 5. Some counted 5, some counted 7, some counted 21. However, all of the reasons go back to being unable to use water. Number 1, the author said, to have an excuse, whether because of traveling or sickness. Let's read the footnote. It's beneficial. The author said, the first condition is to have an excuse, whether because of traveling or sickness, a physical excuse or a religious excuse. The physical excuse is for one not to find water, whether one was traveling or residing. The chances are higher for the one who is traveling to run out of water or to not have it for the duration of one's travel. It is also possible that one does not have water in the area where one is residing. So this is a case of not having water regardless of where you are. The religious excuse is if the sick person would be harmed by using water. This would be an excuse to not use water and make tayammum. Hence, in this case, one has water. But if one uses it, one would get sick, or one's sickness would increase. Or if one's cure from sickness would get delayed. For example, if without using the water, one would be cured in 5 days, but by using the water, one's cure would be delayed for 20 days, this would be an excuse. Or if the water would cause an apparent disfigurement in an apparent organ, or a serious disfigurement in an apparent organ. The apparent organ is the organ that one exposes during work, like for example the face and arms. This disfigurement would be something that would be extremely harmful to the organ. It might be something that would cause others to repel from one. However, if this obvious disfigurement were to happen on an organ that is not normally exposed, like the stomach, in this case, one does not have to make tayammum. In this case, one does not make tayammum. One uses water. If this disfigurement or this defect is slight, like a little darkness in the skin of an apparent organ, this is not an excuse. In this case, one uses water. How does one know whether one would be harmed by using water? An example is if a trustworthy male or female doctor told him that. So the case where the individual is harmed by the water, when we say harm, we don't just mean, for example, he feels uncomfortable because the water is very cold, or he feels uncomfortable because it's very cold outside even if the water is not cold. So he feels the, say, hardship of being wet while the external environment is cold. That's not harm. So nobody can say that, oh, I have to make tayammum because if I make wudu right now, then I'm going to get sick, or this or that. No. So the example of the harm is, for example, obviously death. Like if the person uses the water, he'll die. That's obviously harm. Or if the person uses the water, he will get what is called shame on fahish. Shame on fahish. So shame means like a defect or a blemish or something that is unsightly. And fahish means like extravagant or vulgar, an extreme defect. So let's say the person has some sort of sickness that if they use the water, their face would be disfigured. In that case, they would not be able to use the water. But like the author said, if this defect was not in an apparent organ, like the face and the arms, which are the apparent organs, if it was on a part of the body that is normally not seen, then this is not a reason to make tayammum if one has the water, and it's not counted that the person is harmed. Alhamdulillah. So back to the top, and back to the part that's not the commentary. The author said, number one, to have an excuse, whether because of traveling or sickness. The excuse might be physical or religious, either by being excused by the happening of a physical thing, or due to a religious judgment. So one might not have water, or one cannot use the water because of a religious judgment. Like if one is sick, and if one uses the water, one's sickness will get stronger, or one would die, lose an organ, or an apparent defect would occur to one because of using the water on one of the apparent organs, like one's face and hands, such as the skin drying away in an ugly way, such as the skin drying in an ugly way, like the skin of the fish. So people would feel repulsed from this person. This is the case if it would happen to an apparent organ. So an example of the type of thing that if it was shown on the face or the arms, it would be, anybody using the water, it would be an excuse for them to make tayammum. Is a certain type of effect that some people's bodies have, which is that their skin becomes scaly. So people would feel repulsed by this person. So, if that's the case, if the person, because of using the water, his skin would become scaly, then that person, he does not have to make wudu, rather he would have to make tayammum. Then he could make tayammum. Number two, the setting in of the prayer time. Among the conditions of tayammum to be valid is the setting in of the prayer time for sure or most likely. Like for example, when one sees the sunset, this is for sure. More likely is like, most likely is like the crow of a rooster. The author said, for example, when one sees the sunsets, this is for sure. Yani meaning, how do you know that the Maghrib time is in for sure? When they say for sure, meaning definitively, they know that the sun sets for sure because they saw it. And when they say most likely, this is referring to the strong assumption. And the example for this is like the crow of a rooster for the fajr, if that crow has been tested before. I mean, if that rooster has been tested before. So we have a rooster, and you've tested this rooster, and you see that when he crows, the Fajr is in, so he doesn't crow before it. He crows only when the Fajr is in. So the person who hears the crowing of the rooster, he can say, most likely the Fajr is in. If one makes tayammum to pray while hesitating about the prayer time being in or not, one's tayammum is not valid. So unlike the wudu, the person who's making tayammum, he has to wait until the time is in. Is he sure that the time is in? Either he knows, and he's through a definite method, like observing the sunset himself, or he can know through another method, and not because he saw the sunset himself, but because he knew of the occurrence of something that to him, and it indicates that the sun has set. So instead of it being, let's say, definitive, it's most likely. So like the example of the rooster. He tested the rooster, he sees that the rooster only crows at Fajr. So that means after he has confirmed that the rooster is tested and it's tried and true, after he's confirmed that, then afterwards, if he hears the rooster crow, he can say Fajr is in, and he can go according to that to determine that Fajr is in. The author said, if one makes tayammum to pray while hesitating about the prayer time being in or not, one's tayammum is not valid. So just like for when the person is not sure that the prayer time is in, he cannot, and he will not enter into the prayer. If the person, they say, Allahu Akbar, to enter into the prayer, while doubting, is the prayer time in or not, while not being sure, then that person, he does not enter into the prayer. His prayer doesn't even start. And same thing for the tayammum. If he is unsure about if the prayer time is in or not, then making tayammum, then his tayammum will not be valid. So if one makes tayammum to pray while hesitating about the prayer time being in or not, one's tayammum is not valid. Making tayammum is for necessity. So if the prayer time is not in, there is no necessity. The time of the prayer for the dead Muslim sets in after washing the dead. So for the things that are recommended to for the time that the Muslim makes tayammum, since it's out of a necessity, he has to wait until the prayer time is in. But remember we said that the tayammum can be used to pray any type of prayer. Like if the person doesn't have water, can't use the water. So for the 5 daily prayers, if he wants to pray them, he has to wait, let's say, until Dhuhr is in, and then he makes the tayammum. But what about for other prayers, or for other, let's say, things that he cannot use water for, but that will require something like a purification? So if he doesn't have water, but it's sunnah for him to make ghusl, how is he going to make the ghusl if he doesn't have water? So he makes tayammum. So we said that for the 5 daily prayers he has to wait. We said for the 5 daily prayers he has to wait for the prayer time to be in. But if he wants to make tayammum for, let's say, a recommended ghusl, then the time is considered by when it would be sunnah for him to make that ghusl. So the author said, the time of the prayer for the dead Muslim sets in after washing the dead. And the time of the prayer for asking for rain starts when one wants to perform it. The time of the eclipse prayer starts when the change starts in the sun or moon. The time for the sunnah, which does not have a specific time or reason, is when one wants to perform it. So, if he wants to pray the funeral prayer, that doesn't have a specific time like Dhuhr and Maghrib and Asr and Isha, which is known by the shadows and things like that. The time for when the prayer for the funeral prayer for the Muslims pray, when does that time begin? And then when is it now valid to pray for the deceased Muslim? Is it before he's shrouded? No. Is it before he's washed? No. So it's after he is washed. Because the washing of the deceased, it is a type of purification. It is a ghusl essential. And for if the person wanted to pray the prayer of asking Allah Ta'ala for the rain, when does that prayer time begin? It begins when the person wants to perform it. And for the eclipse prayer, it's sunnah to do, whether it's a lunar eclipse or solar eclipse. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, instructed us that once the rain starts, once the person wants to pray the prayer of the rain, he can make the day. So for that one, it's not like the occurrence of something first and then now let's say he wants to make the animal and do all these other things. No. Rather, it was time for him to pray. He wanted to pray. He knew it was an obligation. It was an obligation. But still use the siwak to right before the prayer. Then the person makes the tayammum. Let's say he wants to pray for the rain to come down. Now he wants to pray, so he makes the tayammum. So it's not related to a specific time. Now for the eclipse prayer, so as you know, it is recommended to pray a certain prayer when the lunar eclipse or the solar eclipse occurs. And so what happens is, let's say for the solar eclipse, the darkness starts to go over the sun slowly. So once that darkness starts to happen, then it's considered to be that the eclipse has begun. When that starts, when that change begins to happen, that means that the time to pray that sunnah prayer has begun, and so they can make tayammum. And the time for the sunnah, which has no specific time or reason, is when one wants to perform it. So again, if someone just wanted to pray 2 sunnah rak'ahs, and they were just like an absolute sunnah, meaning that they don't have a specific reason. Like for example, it's recommended for the Muslim who's going to go around people to make a ghusl. So if he is unable, or if he wants to pray a prayer and he doesn't have the water, or is unable to use it, and if this prayer is not an obligation, it's a recommended prayer, and he wants to just pray 2 rak'ahs, then he makes the time for him to make the tayammum is when he wants to perform those prayers. Number 3 is seeking the water. Seeking the water means after the time of the prayer sets in. Because if one seeks water before the time sets in and does not find it, is not enough. Seeking the water is in regards to the person who is not sure that there is no water. If he is sure he does not need to seek water because there is no benefit in that. He does not need to seek water because there is no benefit in that. And when he's sure. So let's say that he's traveling in the wilderness or an area where there's not like people, and so he wants to get down and he wants to get his tent and he wants to refill his canteen with water, but he's in this place that he's never been before, so there's no way for him to know if there's no water here or if there is water. He has to search, he has to look. So essentially, that person who is in that place, where for him, there could be water there, there could not be water there. So he has to look. He has to search for it. Now when he goes to that place, he's traveling, and he's been down that route many times, and he sees that time and time again he's gone through that road, and he understands that there is no water here. He knows the area, he knows the place, he's familiar with the surroundings. There is no source of water, there's no spring, there's no waterfall, there's no oasis, there's no lake. So he's sure that there's no water here, so he doesn't need to search. He doesn't need to do this prerequisite before making tayammum. Also, seeking the water means the seeker does that or he appoints someone to seek it on his behalf. And he's seeking it doesn't necessarily mean that he himself has to go and investigate. He can do it himself, or he tells someone to go and look at it for him. So what it comes down to, and he's seeking the water, means and he's finding out if there's water or not, searching for the water. And so that can take place in different ways. Here in the commentary or the footnote, it says if you ask someone to seek water for you, that person you ask must be a trustworthy person. Then he says, first, one searches his belongings, and one asks the companion one is traveling with. So part of seeking the water, that process is, he looks into his luggage, he looks into his suitcase that he's traveling with. Is there water in there? If the answer is yes, then that's it. Now he found the water, and he can make wudu. And if he doesn't find it in his belongings, then he asks the people he's traveling with, do any of you have any water that you can be so generous to give, even if it were charging money? And of course, the amount that they charge would have to be within the norm. So after he, let's say, looks himself, looks in his pockets, etc., and after he makes sure that it is not, let's say, somewhere around there. If the author said, if he doesn't, then also seeking the water means seeking himself, means the seeker himself. Either he does that himself or he appoints someone. Then the author said, first one searches his belongings and one asks the companions when he's traveling. So after he searches his belongings, then he checks the people that he's traveling with. So he'll ask them, do you have any water to spare, even if it were by paying the market price. And if they want to, they can charge market price for that water, and he will be obligated to pay, and if he had. So let's say that the only water that he can get to is the water that his traveling companion had, and that water, he was selling it at the normal market price. So he said, I'll sell it to you for the normal market price. If it's normal market price, and that water is available, and he has the money, and it's not like, for example, going to cut into his bare necessities, and he has in excess of what he needs to survive, then in that case, he has to pay the fee, right, for that person to give him the water. And if that person who has the water, and that this person needs to make wudu, he's not obligated to let him have it for free. Rather, the one who wants to buy it, or the one who needs it, and is able to pay for it, and he has the money, he pays the money, and then he gets the water, and then he makes wudu. But if he refuses, then he says, oh, I'm not going to pay, why should I pay? Then he'll be in a situation where he won't have a valid tayammum because there's water there that he can use. So the other said, page 87, he asked them if they have water to give him or for a payment. So you can say as a gift, as a donation, or he buys it off of them. Because some people would only give the water for money. And some people would only be moved to give the money if they were getting paid. If he does not find water and he was in a flat land, he looks to the different directions. This is a beneficial footnote, even though it's long. So let's read it, 119. There are different scenarios to the area of land one is dealing with. Either A, one is familiar with the area, or B, one is not familiar with it. So we already mentioned these two cases. If he's familiar with the area and he's sure that there's no water there, he doesn't have to look. He just goes straight away to make the emblem. If he's not familiar with it, and so he doubts is there water here or not, to him there could be water, so he has to search. And the third scenario is, we're going to mention the distance. The third scenario is he's sure that there's water here, so he has to go look for it, and this is where the distance varies. When he's not familiar with it and he's not sure if there's water there or not, then he has to search for the distance called Haddul Ghawth. Quick pop quiz time. Does anyone out there know what the meaning of Haddul Ghawth is? I know it's an Arabic term, but what is the distance of Haddul Ghawth? What is being referred to? So basically, Haddul Ghawth, it means a distance that if you were to call out to the people that are traveling with you, they will hear you. So that distance, whatever that distance is, that if you yell out to your companions that they would hear you, this is called Haddul Ghawth. So he has to search that distance. Now he doesn't have to cover that distance in all four directions, obviously, because that would take too long. But what he would do is just does a 360, goes around. If he is in a land that has hills and valleys, so he would go to a vantage point where you can see everything, and then he would do the 360 there, and he would look in all directions there. We have a question. He doesn't have to walk in all those directions, no. In any of the directions. So the question here says, can we rely on an app made by trustworthy and knowledgeable Muslims for prayer times without observing personally, for example, Islam.ms, also for the sunrise time? So yeah, the rule is that if there is a trustworthy Muslim who knows how to determine that the prayer time is in, I mean, he knows those rules, he's knowledgeable of those rules, and then that trustworthy Muslim, he tells you, for example, Maghrib is in, or Dhuhr is in, or Isha is in, then you can take their word. They have to be trustworthy and they have to know how the prayer times come in. So that trustworthy Muslim, he documents on a paper, he writes it down, for example, and then he distributes it. Let's say he observes it for years and then he writes it down every single prayer time when he observed Asr is in, Dhuhr is in, Maghrib is in, Isha is in. So then he distributes that paper based on the dates and based on the time frame. Then that would be sufficient so you can go by it. So specifically for the apps, if you know who came up with those numbers on the apps and who came up with that timetable where they say, for example, Dhuhr is 125, Asr is 4:55, Maghrib is 7:40. If you know who put those numbers there and they're trustworthy and they know how to tell the prayer times, then you can go by that, yes. But for other apps and other calendars, if it is a mystery to you, who is the person that came up with these numbers, these times, then for sure it's not permissible to go by what they made. So continuing with the footnote. A, if one is familiar with the area of land one is in this instance, there are two situations. One knows there is no water available in it within the distance of Haddul Qurb, so that one makes tayammum. The second situation is one knows there is water in it within the distance of Haddul Qurb, then one seeks, fetches it, and makes wudu. So when the person is sure that there's no water available in the distance of al-Qurb, he makes tayammum. And if he knows that there is water there within the distance of Haddul Qurb, then he has to go fetch it. So basically, let's say that this person is traveling and he comes to a place that he's not familiar with. So this person, he doesn't know if there's water there or not, so he has to search for Haddul both. But if he is in a place where he is sure there's water here, the distance that he has to look is Haddul Qurb. But if he knows that beyond the distance of Haddul Qurb there's no, that's where the water is, or that's where the harm will occur, then since this is the case is that the person knows that there's water in this area, he has to look in that whole area for Haddul Qurb. Then letter B, it says, if one is not familiar with the area of land one is in, then one seeks the water within the distance of Haddul Ghawth. One cannot make tayammum without seeking and not finding the water within this distance. And in this scenario, A, one looks and one belongs for water, and one asks his companion if they have water. If there is no water, then after that, one looks around, haddul ghawth. This is the distance that if someone shouted for help, his voice would be heard at a distance by people who were busying themselves with work, gathering their travel needs, but they are still able to hear his call. This is not a far distance. Abī Shujā said, it is the distance, Rafi' said, it is the distance of a throw of a spear. Number 1, continue. If the land was flat, one looks in the 4 directions from one spot while paying attention to areas of vegetation. Number 2, if the land was not flat, one would find an elevated position, an elevated spot from which one can look in all the directions of the world. In this case, one does not have to go the distance forward or backward or to the left or to the right from where he is. Rather, he can look for the water. He can look for the water, and it means he doesn't have to physically walk that distance, he can just use his eyes. He might use clues, like if he saw an area with vegetation, because it might indicate that there's water in that area. Or he might see birds soaring above, which might be an indication that there's water below and the like. Yeah, so certain species of birds, they sense, or that there's a certain inherent trait that they have that they can find the water. SubhanAllah. There's even one bird called the hudhud, the hobo, that it can see the aquifers, or yeah, it can see water while it's flying in the air. So it does a scan. Whenever it flies, it does a scan. So in the desert, or even like not in the desert, but the birds, certain types of birds, they gather around areas where there's water. Number 3, if parts of the land were flat, and other parts were not, then one does the combination of the above in order to visually cover the distance of haddul ghawth. There are different cases for the one who is seeking water. Oh, this is footnote 120. And let me get to that. Back to the top, page 87, 4th line, and you start with the 5th line. This is enough to look in the 4 directions. This is the case this is in the case there is no barrier like trees. Otherwise, it's not enough to look in the 4 directions. Rather, it needs to go searching in all the directions. And this is for haddul ghawth. It's a much shorter distance. If the land is not flat, he searches by going to a distance that if anything occurs to him and he needs help, they can hear him and come to help him. Footnote 120. The first one. Okay. He said, after he asks his companions for the water, they don't have it. If he does not find water and he was in a flat land, he looks to the different directions. This is enough to look in the 4 directions. This isn't the case. There is no barrier like trees. Otherwise, it is not enough to look in the 4 directions.
So you would have to walk.
And for the short distance, yes. It's Haddul Ghawth.
If you walk the distance where if you would need help.
Yes.
You can't even hear him.
Yeah, he says, this is the case this is in the case there is no barrier like trees. Otherwise, it is not enough to look in the four directions. Rather, he needs to go searching in all the directions. If the land is not flat, he searches by going to a distance that if anything occurs to him and he needs help, they can hear him and come to help him. Footnote 120. There are different cases for the one who is seeking water. One is certain that there is water in the area that he is in. In that case, he has to look for Haddul Qurb, which is the greater distance. The second one is one has doubt whether or not there is water in the area that he is. So in that case, he does Haddul Ghawth. The third scenario is one is certain that there is no water in the area that he's in. He doesn't have to make tayammum. He doesn't have to seek the water. He can go straight into tayammum. There are three distances that the scholars refer to in this matter. Haddul Ghawth. This is estimated to have a radius of 300 cubits, about 46 centimeters. Haddul Qurb. This is 1/2 of a farsakh, which is 1.5 Islamic miles. Some scholars said that 1 mile is equivalent to 2,000 cubits. Some said 3,000 cubits. Another said 6,000 cubits. So that's, according to the saying of 6,000 cubits, it would be a long distance.
So basically, you would need to look in the direction that far, and there was no barriers.
For the Haddul Ghawth, yes. Then the third, he said, is called Haddul Bu'd. This is further than Haddul Qurb. If one is certain that there is water within the distance of Haddul Qurb, then one is obligated to seek it. However, if one is certain that there is water within the distance of Haddul Bu'd, one is not obligated to seek it. So let's stick to these two distances. One is called Haddul Ghawth, which is the radius of approximately 300 cubits. And the other one is Haddul Qurb, which is the farsakh, which is half a farsakh, which is 1.5 Islamic miles. And some scholars say the lowest distance for 1 Islamic mile is equivalent to 2,000 cubits, so that's already a lot. So, first scenario, one is certain that there's water in that area, so he's obligated to look Haddul Qurb, which is 1.5 Islamic miles. If he's not sure whether there's water in that area, then he's obligated to look in Haddul Ghawth, which is a radius of 300 cubits. The author said, that is the distance within the rescue limit, Haddul Ghawth. It is not an obligation on him to go further unless he knows that there is water within the distance of half a farsakh. If he knows there is water in that distance, it is an obligation on him to seek that water, even if the time of prayer goes out before he reaches the water, because water is considered close. The excuse of tayammum is not to have water, so if it is close to him, he has to get it.
So what does he do? He delays his prayer?
Yeah, so when he has to seek it for Haddul Qurb, which is the 1.5 Islamic miles, and because he knows that there's water in that area, so he goes to find it. Even if while he's going to find it, the time of the prayer goes out. So, and while he's going to find it, the time of the prayer goes out. And he won't be able to make tayammum because it's considered consider that he has water, technically. So the original purpose of the tayammum is so that he can pray when he doesn't have water.
So in this case, it's just because he knows that there is water, so he would go seek it even though the prayer time is going to run out.
Yes, for that one, he knows that there's water there.
And he would not be simple.
It would not be simple, right? Number 4, to be unable to use water. Footnote 121. The 4th condition is if one would be harmed by using the water. If, for example, he feared from dying, or if he feared from losing an organ, or there is water nearby, but he had an excuse for not using it, like if there is a wild animal between him and the water, or if there was an enemy wanting to kill him, or if he feared someone stealing his money, not someone else's money. In these cases, this is as if he does not have water. And in these cases of tayammum, subhanAllah, they make us think about the Muslims in Palestine who are going through a tough situation, that they don't have water to eat or drink, and even in some cases maybe if they were to try and get the water, the Yahud would be waiting to snipe them or to shoot them or to kill them. So if it was like a lake or something like that, or a well, they wouldn't be able to go to it because they would get killed. So that's an excuse for making tayammum, subhanAllah. May Allah protect us, ameen. The author said, in this case one makes tayammum. Or if one has an animal which is not permissible to kill, not like a pig. And so if one makes wudu, this animal, such as one's horse or donkey, would die from thirst, then one makes tayammum. This is another proof for the truthfulness of Islam, which is that if you had a horse or if you had a donkey and you're traveling with it and you only had enough water to let the animal drink, and if you gave that animal the water to drink, you wouldn't have enough water to make wudu, the creator of the universe gives precedence to that animal so that they don't die from thirst, and instead makes the facility for the human to make tayammum. So if he only has enough water to let his animal drink so the animal doesn't die from thirst, he gives the animal that water and he makes tayammum so he can pray. Now, if one can gather the water that drops from one and drink it later, one can make tayammum, because usually the person does not feel comfortable to drink this, but one can do this for one's animal. So here we have a case where the person, like, he can make the wudu, and then the water that drips off, he collects it, so you have it to drink, and he'll be able to drink it. But because the person is usually not comfortable to drink that, he can give it to his animal, so the animal would have the water to drink, and he would have made wudu with it. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. We finished up to page 89. To use pure soil that has dust. And we'll talk about the soil, the conditions with the soil that has to be used in order for the tayammum to be valid. Are there any questions about any of these cases? طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.